All right. So I'm going to talk, trying to wrap it together a little bit here and talk a bit about kind of how do you start this? Where do you start? We've talked a lot about what forest management is, some ideas, but really about this whole planning idea of forest management, how you can really get an idea and get the direction that you need to actually start forest management. And so as everybody mentioned, and Hank did a great job kind of getting an intro to it, this whole idea behind forest management really allows us to direct the development and the change of the forest over time so that it better meets certain objectives, right? The objectives of our landowners. And we're improving potentially the forest species composition, the genetics, the economic or wildlife value, the health, the recreational opportunities, all these different things through management. We're mitigating threats like invasive species. We're building in sustainability and resilience. But how does a landowner know where to start with forest management? There's all these neat things to do, all these things to consider, and where do they begin? And so, really, my kind of take home talk here is you begin with the forest management plan. So forest management plans really are that roadmap for forest management. It gives you the steps that are needed to move your forest in a direction that meets or goes towards your objectives, your goals for that land, your vision, as Hank said, for that land. The forest management plan should direct everything towards that vision of yours. And it's a plan that's really based on inventory data, good, hard, solid data, the current condition of your forest, the soils of your land, and everything. So it's really rooted in data and in science, and then aimed at your objectives. And the beauty of a forest management plan is that it gives you detailed schedule of forest management practices, what needs to be done and when it needs to be accomplished. And if you're interested and have the ability to get some technical or financial assistance through programs, really a forest management plan is that first step. You need to have that in place before you can go out there and get that technical or financial assistance. And so I'll just start here a little bit talking about Illinois and what we have in terms of cost share and technical assistance that's out there. In the state, we have what's called the Forestry Development Act, and that is administered by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. And so for owners of 10 or more contiguous forested acres, you can enroll in this program, and the big step to that is an improved what's called a forest stewardship plan. So that's their name for the management plan. And this to be in this plan, you need to have those acres, have an approved plan, and then actually start implementing the actions that are prescribed in that plan. And that allows you to be eligible for some tax incentives in the state. And depending on what other situations you have with your property tax, it could be a very, very significant decrease in your property taxes. It also has you eligible for cost share and technical assistance. So the Forestry Development Act really is the kind of major venue for state assistance for forested landowners. But there's also the Conservation Stewardship Program. It's the CSP state program. And so that is a little bit lower threshold. I think it's 5 acres of all conservation land. So it could be some forest and some other lands. And it has different tax incentives and different some cost share programs with that, as well as the Illinois Recreational Access Program. So that is a program where private landowners provide some level of access from the public in a controlled manner for hunting or bird watching or something. And in return, they get cost share on planned management as well as implementation of some of the management practices. It's really a great program, as well as some per acre cost kind of rental fees. And then, as we mentioned before, there is some NRCS, so that's federal, the Natural Resource Conservation Service. They have programs that can be used on forest for cost share, primarily through the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, the EQIP program. And there's cost share opportunities both for writing your plan as well as implementing the actions prescribed in your plan. And in that, in Illinois, we've had a couple big pools of dollars through separate kind of grant programs and separate things that allow specifically money to go into EQIP for forestry. So there are, and depending on where you're at in Illinois, there may be even a little bit more money is available to help out with forest management practices. And then NRCS also does the Conservation Stewardship Program, the CSP Federal, which is another program that can kind of help incentivize, good management of your forests. So there's a lot of technical assistance out there, but all of it starts with really a good, solid forest management plan. So I wanted to get an idea of you all and what you have in terms of forest management plan. So I'm going to put a poll up here, and it's just going to be one quick question. Do you have a forest management plan in place? And so I'm interested in hearing from you whether you have one that's already written and established and one that's not. So I'll give you a couple minutes here to answer the question. And it's more just kind of for me to understand who the audience is here and where they're at on this path of forest management. So as you're answering it, I'll give you another 15, 20 seconds to go ahead and answer it, and then we'll move on. Okay, so let's go ahead and move along. It seems like most everybody's answered it. And it seems to me that the majority of you do not have a forest management plan. Some of you, about 30%, do. And then somebody doesn't know. And so the great thing is if you don't know if you have a forest management plan or not, you can actually go to the Illinois Department of Natural Resources District Forester and ask them. So since these forest management plans are approved by the DNR Forester, they actually have a copy on file. So if you've recently bought your land and you don't know if there was an existing forest management plan on your parcel when you bought it, you can actually go in and ask them. And it's another way to kind of check up with that. But let's keep going forward. And I'm gonna, when I talk about forest management plans, I'm really talking about the template and the system that's in place for this Forestry Development Act program, the DNR program, which they call forest stewardship plans. So this is one type of forest management plan. And so this is the one that I'm more familiar with. So we're going to kind of follow it along through the presentation. It follows a specific template and it's written by a professional. So this is a professional plan. Unless you have experience in training in forestry, you're not going to be able to write your own plan necessarily. So it needs to be somebody that has the credentials and the experience to write a forest management plan. And usually in Illinois, that's a consultant forester. Sometimes it may be an agency forester or another organization, but most of the time it's a consultant forester, a private business that you contract with to write your plan. It's then approved by the IDNR district forester in your region. So each region in the state has a district forester. They would be responsible for reading over the plan, making sure it meets the templates and the requirements, and then it's approved and to kind of get into this FDA program. And these programs are written for 10-year lifespan. So at 10 years, and then it needs to be updated. And the whole idea behind that is after 10 years, things may change, conditions may change, there may be new issues. And so you shouldn't plan any longer than that just because your plan may not be as relevant if things change in a certain way. So that's why these plans are typically 10-year plans. So if you are interested in getting a plan, again, you need to find a professional forester to write it. So again, these are detailed on specific plans. So expertise in forestry and land management is needed to write them. Most of them are written by consultant foresters, as I said, for a fee. And so the nice thing about this is there's a lot of opportunities for cost share to pay for some, if not all, of the cost of writing one of these plans. So before you write one, definitely check with your DNR forester and with your NRCS office in your county, because you may have some cost share available to write that plan. Some situations, there may be other agencies or organizations that can help you develop your plan. But again, start by talking to your district forester. And so just a little bit here in Illinois, this is, we're going to share these slides. So I just wanted to put this in here for you to kind of show you some of that assistance in forestry that's available in the state. And so You can get a map of where the district foresters and their contact information, where they are across the state, so you can find out who in your county covers. We have a directory of the different consultant foresters in the state available. Extension forestry is always available to ask questions and kind of help point you in the right direction, as well as your district conservationist through the NRCS. So these are kind of the professionals that part of their job is to go and help private landowners with forestry questions and forestry needs. So just having that there so you can find it. A little bit of tips on finding the right consultant forester, and there's a lot of consultant foresters, and you want somebody that works well with you. So just some tips: I would ask your district forester from DNR for a list of local foresters that they often work with, so you can get the local folks just to get an idea. And then I would interview the consultant forester, meet with that person, ask them about how well they would tailor their plan to what you want as the landowner. And if they seem unwilling or uninterested in your objectives for your land, they may not be right for you. There's some consultant foresters that are really focused on timber. And if you're not, if you're more of a wildlife person or timber's not a big objective of yours, if they're not willing to kind of adjust how they write a plan, then maybe you should find somebody else, right? Ask for and check some of the recent clients. Other people they've written plans for, were they happy with their plans? Ask the other clients, was the forester responsive to their questions and easy to work with? You know, this is a big program, so you want somebody that's going to give you a good product, right? So take a look at some of their plans. Spend a little bit of time doing your homework and choosing the right person. And as I mentioned, before you have your plan developed, check with your local NRCS office or your local district forester about opportunities to cost share that plan development. So that way you don't necessarily have to incur all that cost yourself. These plans vary in cost greatly, depending on the size of your forest, how easy it is to access, how far the consultant forester needs to drive to get there. But generally, the forester would charge a flat fee plus a per acre cost to get that plan written for yours. And again, it varies wildly depending on a lot of factors. But once you get a professional forester, there's some information they need at the beginning to start developing your plan. And so this forester would start with interviewing the landowners about the land and really looking for that vision, as Hank said. What do the landowners want to do with that forest? What are their goals? What are their objectives? And that's really the target of your forest management. And they get that through talking with the landowners. And the landowners can always give them information about the history of the site, what kind of past management has been done on the site, some of these things that may be useful for the plan development. And then they'll collect details about the forest and go online, go to plat maps, get property boundary information, get maps, aerial imagery, soil maps. All of these kind of go into the development of the plan. And then they'll determine the forest stands. And we mentioned that earlier, and I'll get into it in a second. And it's just a way of dividing up your forest when you're deciding on the management recommendations. And the big thing is they're going to conduct an inventory of each stand. And so an inventory gives them that detailed data on the trees and the forest condition that they'll use to develop the plan. And we'll talk about that in a second too. But back to this idea about forest stands. So these are just a way of partitioning the forest into areas with similar characteristics. They may have this, relatively the same age of trees, same site conditions like slope, soils, maybe the same management history. And it allows the forester then to kind of prescribe management recommendations that can work across that single stand. What you don't want to have is maybe a dry upland site in the same stand as a low wet forest, because they may have different needs, different management needed. And by separating them into forest stands, then you can prescribe the right management for each block. So here's just an example. This is a small forest that's kind of split up into stands from a friend of mine here. And you can see that the forester broke it into 4 different stands. Stand 1 is 8.7 acres and it's upland mature oak hickory. Stand 2 is actually 3 different parcels of forest but they're all similar enough, even though they're not contiguous, they're similar enough that they're lumped together as immature oak hickory. And then stand 3 is old pastured upland mixed hardwoods. And then stand 4 is mostly tree of heaven, right? So they split it into these that are all kind of ecologically different in history, different enough that their management recommendations are going to be separate for each of these stands. And let's hope that stand 4, the main management recommendation will be to get rid of the tree of heaven. And so once they have the stands kind of delineated and things out there, they're ready to do the inventory. And this is where they get out there and get that information about the trees and about the forest that really allows them to know where the site is now, and what needs to happen to get to where they want to get for the landowner objectives. And so that inventory is a subsample of each of the stands, and it allows them to understand more about the forest metrics. They'll get information about the entire stand, like the diversity of trees, the density of trees, how much seedling regeneration is on the ground. But then they get a lot of these individual tree metrics because they're measuring a subsample of a lot of the trees in that stand. So it could be species, size of tree, the height of a tree, how healthy they are, and this idea of tree class, what class do they fall in? And we'll talk about that next. But then also when they're doing the inventory, they're getting information on what invasive species are out there, what other features may be of interest, like threatened and endangered species, understory plants, old fences or other hazards, things like that. As they do the inventory, they can build into their plan. And this whole idea about tree class. And this goes to a lot of what Lenny was talking about with his timber harvest. So when they're out there measuring trees, they give them a ranking or a class designation. And so this varies depending on forester by forester, but here in Illinois, it's often kind of a 4-class system where class 1 are your highest quality, healthiest, most desirable species in really good form. So these are the ones that Lenny was talking about, that if you can leave a lot of these, that as you harvest, these would make up the majority of your future canopy. You would want ones that are young enough to be able to really respond to kind of opening up and develop your next canopy. Class 2 are still really good trees that have acceptable forms, but are not nearly as good as class 1. If you don't have enough of those class 1s, class 2 will work as the trees you leave to let them grow. If you have plenty of class 1, then those class 2 trees would be really marketable, valuable trees to kind of sell in a timber harvest or something. Class 3 trees are merchantable. They have value, but they're really undesirable, or maybe they're in decline, so they're not going to last a long time. So you're capturing that value of them in any kind of harvest. And then class 4 trees would be unmerchantable or undesirable trees that you really kind of want to get off the landscape, and you want to remove them out of your forest because you don't want them to be reproducing or to make up a large component of your forest. And anyway, you just split the forest up into these categories, and it helps you understand kind of where your forest is in terms of quality, quantity, value, and things like that. And so that is all done as part of this tree inventory. And so, for example, here's a beautiful white oak here, tall, straight, healthy. The classic, it's healthy enough, it's not in decline. So this is a great class 1 tree, right? Very valuable, very tall, straight, good form, something that you would want this tree reproducing as much as you can and getting great genetics on your landscape. And then here's another white oak in a close by forest. And you can see it's not as straight. It has kind of a bad form. It doesn't have a big canopy. And so this one would be kind of maybe in that class 3, or if you needed to stretch it in the class 2 there, right? So it has a lot of value, but it's not necessarily one that you think would respond well to management or be that future class. But then this forest inventory gives you other information about your forest, like the density, so trees per acre. As forests develop over time, there is a natural concentration of the growth into fewer larger trees. Trees have to die because if you start with maybe 10,000 seedlings per acre, eventually by the time that forest matures, it's going to be down to 200 or so or less trees per acre, right? So there's a lot of natural tree death as a forest stand continues to develop. And then this kind of helps you understand where you're at on that continuum, the density of your trees, the trees per acre. And so just an example, you see a lot of these trees, a lot more trees in this acre versus this acre, right? So trees per acre helps you understand that, just how dense the trees are. And then trees are measured in terms of their size by diameter at breast height, DBH. And so you measure them at 4.5 feet above the ground and get their diameter. And that gives you a sense of the size of the tree. You can help calculate board feet in the tree. So that's a common metric that we use in terms of describing just how big a tree is. And so you can use this data from the inventory to calculate your average tree diameter in a stand or your average tree diameter by species. And it helps you describe just the forest, kind of what's going on in there. And then you can take those two measurements, trees per acre and average tree diameter, and you can calculate basal area. And so basal area really kind of combines both of those, the density of a tree, the tree density and the tree size. And it's kind of this cross-sectional area of all the stems in a forest measured. And it's basically how much wood is in a particular acre of land. And so again, it's a factor of both tree size and tree density. And you can see here, if you take all of those, measure them right there at 4.5 feet, add them together, and then you can get your basal area. And we get this through this idea of plot measurements, right? We have a plot, we measure all the trees in there, we calculate their size, and then kind of build that up to build this measurement of basal area. And this is a really, really common measurement that's used to describe a forest. A lot of things are tied with basal area in terms of like correlated well with canopy cover, the ability of trees to regenerate depending on the basal area. So it's a common measurement that you'll read in your forest management plan. And it may vary all the way to 40 square feet per acre, which would be a very more open stand, all the way to 120 or 130 square feet per acre, which would be a very dense stand. So that's kind of another measurement to help you describe your forest. So for example, this forest would have a whole lot higher of a basal area. You can see it's loaded with trees. They're densely packed in there versus this forest. This would have a much lower basal area, even though the average tree diameter on this forest is probably roughly the same as the last forest. There's just much fewer trees per acre. They're much more widely spaced. So the forester uses this inventory data along with soils, map data, everything to kind of describe the starting conditions. It tells you where this forest is at right now. And then they determine what actions are needed to move that forest towards those landowner objectives. And that's really the management recommendations in your plan. And so that's the kind of where the rubber meets the road in terms of what does the landowner need to do to manage their forest. So here's kind of an example or a layout of the content of a plan. When you read it, this is really what you might see in a forest management plan, these sections. And I'll use kind of examples from two different real forest management plans kind of throughout this presentation. So the first section would be landowner goals, and then an overview of the property, descriptions of the stand, recommendations, other aspects like wetlands, wildlife, and then the summary of activities, and then the maps and things at the end. We're going to go over each one of them in detail here. So the landowner goals is the first thing, right? So landowners manage their forest for a lot of reasons. As we talked about just a second ago, it could be timber. It may be just recreation, hiking, enjoyment. Actually, the majority of landowners, if you look at the data here in Illinois, manage their land for recreation and for hunting opportunities. So it could be hunting opportunities. It might just be forest health out there, or you could be looking for non-timber forest income, right? Something like maple syrup production, growing ginseng, things like that. Right? There's a lot of different reasons why people manage their land. And so let's look at those two examples. So this is a forest management plan that was pulled from Central Illinois, South Central Illinois up by Marion County. And so their goal, this is Southern Illinois, sorry, this is Southern Illinois. Their goal was really to enhance their forest ecosystem's health and dynamics. So they wanted more oaks, they wanted fire on there, they wanted deer browse, and they wanted some value for timber production, right? So this is kind of pulled straight out of one plan. The next plan, very similar. They wanted wildlife habitat. They wanted more oak and hickories on there with some economic feasibility. They wanted recreational opportunities and then timber harvesting. They wanted some value coming out of there, right? So these are two different plans. People wanted different things kind of for their woodlands. So my next poll I have for you all is really, what are your goals for your forest? If you're a forest landowner, let's see, and trying to choose the three top answers here. Why do you want to manage your forest? What are the goals that you have for your forest? So choose up to three, and I'm just kind of interested in hearing what you all have here. And the nice thing is there's really no wrong answers, right? That's the beauty of forest management is, it's geared towards what you want to do as the landowner, what you want to get out of your forest. All right, everybody's answering. This is great. We'll give you all another 10, 15 seconds to answer. All righty. Like answers have slowed down. I'll go ahead and end the poll and show you all. So it looks like 77% of you had wildlife habitat as one of the top goals. Healthy ecosystem, non-recreation style hunting. All of those were listed as major goals. Timber production, some in there. Non-timber forest as well. Hunting. So again, it varies, and that's exactly what I expected. Is different people have different goals for their forest. So thank you so much. Alrighty, just moving on then. The next section of the plan would be your property overview. And this is a basic section that just kind of describes in the plan where the forest is, how to get there, what the acreage is, what the history. And so, for example, here, 80 acres and then this township, here's the GPS points, a little bit about the history of it, different things like that. This one is in Johnson County, what's adjacent land use, what the history is. So just real basic, simple section. And then typically at the end, there's maps to really kind of give that detail of where it's at. And this is also where you may see the stand maps. And so the two different ones really did different approaches to stands. The one on the left just kind of divided them up like this. That's not necessarily my most favorite way of doing it. The one on the right kind of separated them by aspect, one side of the road versus the other side of the road. Just different ways to do it. But here's where it would describe the stands. And then this next section really is the meat of the plan. And so this is where the landowner gets the idea of what the forest conditions are now in each stand and what the recommendations are. Right? So this is really where the plan helps the landowner figure out what to do. And so again, it describes the conditions. So these are two different plans. The first one is majority of the stand has a west, and we're doing stand one in each side, has west and south facing slopes. It's mixed oak with black oak and white oak in there. Stand two is a flat to moderately sloping upland oak hickory forest with a lot of oak, hickory, and ash, white oak, black oak, northern red oak, hickory, right? And then plans will have this in the data form. So this is based upon the inventory that they did. And so this is really, really good information to describe the stand and what you have. So if you see on the top of both of them, they have these classes 1 through 4. And you can see on the left hand, this stand had no good species, right? No good trees were classed out. Not many in the reserve, and that last one is volume per acre, and most of the volume is in harvest, so lower quality trees in this stand. But if you look at the one on the right, it has the majority of the volume in per acre here in class 1, so good stand. So even though both of these stands have a basal area of 106 square feet per acre and an average diameter of 9.7 inches per tree and roughly the same volume, 4,000 here to a little over 5,000 here, the quality is very different, and it really shows out in this data, right? So 0 good trees on the left, where the majority of the volume is on good trees on the right. So very different there. You can look at each individual species to figure it out. The one on the right, white oak, has the most volume, average diameter of 17 inches in there at 13 trees per acre. The one on the right here, black oak, has the most volume with a 33 square feet of basal area per acre, 27 trees with an average diameter of 15 inches, right? So you can really get a lot of data here about the trees, the condition they're in, how many trees you have. And so these charts are really powerful in a forest management plan for really allowing the landowner to understand their forest. And then they have other information in here about stocking rates, and basically stocking rates are how fully occupied that stand is in terms of potential to grow. If they're way up there close to 100% or over 100%, then they're losing capacity to grow. They've kind of filled up every available niche. If they're down lower than that, then there's still some room to grow. It's a common feature used in forest management. And then some more information there, right, in this forest management plan. And so this whole idea of stocking, these charts are pretty interesting, and they're useful to understand where you have average tree diameter here. As you go left, the trees get bigger. Basal area, as you go up, the trees get, the basal area gets bigger. And as you go to the right, the trees per acre get more. So it's kind of a three-dimensional graph. And as trees grow, they naturally get more and more basal area. And then the idea of thinning them is you thin them out and you thin smaller trees, so your average tree diameter gets bigger while your basal area gets smaller. And so it helps you guide kind of where to manage and what your targets are with these stocking charts. And they're available for all over the United States. And so you may see these in your forest management plan just to understand. The idea is to predict kind of when you're losing growth potential and when you need to thin is kind of why they're used. And then there's recommendations per stand, right? So this is, again, the heart of your forest management plan. You can see on the left that stand 1 has had a timber harvest in the past 10 or 15 years. There's a high amount of tree generation. A light forest stand improvement is what they're recommending, as well as invasive species control and a prescribed fire. The stand on the right, they are recommending a selective harvest to capture the value of some of the overmature trees that are in there. And so it says, basically trees that have disease, insect damage, overmature, or other health issues should be considered first for management, as well as some heavy thinning and invasive species control in that stand, right? So different recommendations slightly for each of those stands. And then once you get out of that, and then they'll have that information for each stand, there's other aspects of forest management. So this could be a lot of different things, and you often get this idea of recreation, aesthetics, wetlands, wildlife, rare species, forest health. All of these are like bulleted kind of sections in the forest management plan. And this whole idea of other aspects really is just a catch-all. It can include anything that's specific to the landowner's objectives, unique features, general forest health, anything that they want, as well as more details on the process of implementing the forest management plan. So a lot of times you'll have management recommendations for how to control invasive species, information about how to do thinnings, what rate to do thinnings, and things like that. So there's a lot of good information often put into this section of the forest management plan, as well as this idea of wetlands and wildlife and rare species. And just an example, these two, they treated them very differently. The one on the left, it was 1 page and kind of a bulleted list. The one on the right, I think it went for about 8 or 9 pages, right? So different foresters will write them in different levels. If you are a landowner that really wants a lot to do with wildlife, this section will probably be a little more expanded than if you're not necessarily interested in wildlife. So just to blow that up, some examples here. So one example on the left, reducing thick bush honeysuckle ground cover was one recommendation to enhance wildlife. And on the right, selective cutting, leaving 2 den trees, so dead snag trees or big trees with holes in them per acre, was another recommendation. So they're all over the place. And then kind of the last section I'll talk about is this, and it's an important section, is the compiled summary of schedule of activities. And so this is where you basically have a calendar of all the different activities that are recommended for all the stands into one place. So this allows a landowner to kind of a quick reference guide to understand what they need to do and when they need to do it. The other thing that's very valuable for is for when you're looking for cost share. They can see exactly what's recommended in the plan in one place, and so they can apply for cost share. So you can see here this combined schedule for the first plan. It has prescribed fire, forest stand improvement, and brush management, which is just bush honeysuckle control. And they actually list the NRCS code to make it really easy for applying for cost share availability. And then on the bottom right, similar here, harvest, brush management, timber stand improvement, monitoring it, and then some of the practice codes that you can apply for, and then which stands these apply for. So really good information of everything kind of put into one easy to find place, easy to look place to get there. So again, just lastly, looking at it, these are kind of the standard sections of a forest management plan. Every forest management plan is going to look different, but in general, they should have and cover these sections. So the first thing you should do when you get a plan is to read it. Sit down and read through the entire thing. Mark it up, what stuff you don't understand, things you want more information on, and then go back to your forester, whoever wrote the plan, and they should be able to sit down and clarify anything that you don't understand or something that doesn't make sense or you need more information on. And then I would also bring it to your IDNR district forester. You make sure they have a copy of it on file, which the consultant forester should have already sent them one, but ask them about it. They should be willing to kind of walk through it with you as well. Talk about any questions you have, talk about what aspects of it may be eligible for cost share. And so it's really good to kind of get these experts with you and ask the questions then when you first get this plan, but you have to be able to read through it first to really kind of understand what's in there. And then don't just put it on the shelf and never look at it and just happy that you got your tax incentives. You know, this is a plan that should be revisited every year to see what you should do this year. You should be writing on it, like when you finished an action or a practice recommended, write on there when you did it and how it went, things like that. It should be a living document that you use throughout its 10-year life cycle. If you're going to implement your plan, check with IDNR and NRCS definitely for cost share opportunities. Other groups such as the National Wild Turkey Federation, Pheasants Forever, local cooperative weed management areas, other nonprofits like RC&Ds, they may have cost share opportunities available in your area as well. So look around a little bit. Forest management can be expensive. So if you can get cost share, that's a huge help for landowners, but definitely start with your district forester and ask around for other folks too. You can contract the work out and hire consultants or contractors to do it, or you can do it yourself. If you want to do it yourself, learn, ask questions, go to extension field days, join forestry groups like the Illinois Forestry Association, so you build up your knowledge to be able to implement the forest management yourself. So I'll end just here with a little bit about some of the common forest management practices that you see recommended in plans, or things that I see recommended in plans. So for thinning or forest stand improvement, they may call it timber stand improvement. I don't know why they moved forward. They may call it thinning. They may call it site prep for natural regeneration. There's a lot of different things they could call it, but overall it's thinning the stand in a non-commercial way. So this would be trees that aren't of marketable size, thinning them out to change the light conditions in the understory. This is a very, very common practice that's recommended, again, to kind of alter those light conditions. Especially in upland forest. Crop tree release, which we've talked about quite a bit here, and it's kind of freeing up those larger trees to grow a little faster, to removing them, the competing trees from them. And this could be cut. This could be a commercial cut or a non-commercial cut, depending on the size of your forest. which means you could either get paid you could sell the trees or not sell the trees depending on their size. But crop tree release is a commonly prescribed practice in forest management plans. Prescribed fire, especially in our upland systems and in the Midwest, a lot of our uplands were fire-dependent ecosystems driven by kind of natural fires over the last 8,000 years or so, or human-caused fires. And so adding prescribed fire into a system is great for wildlife in a lot of situations, great to kind of set the light conditions up for better oak regeneration. So there's a lot of benefits for prescribed fire, and you'll see a lot of management plans recommend that. Invasive species control, we've already mentioned it quite a bit today, but invasive species control is often recommended in there, especially pay attention to when it's recommended. As Lenny said, if you're going to do a harvest or a heavy thinning or something that allows a lot of light to the understory, invasive species control should be recommended to do that beforehand, several years beforehand, to get that under control, so you won't have a big problem once you add that disturbance to the ecosystem. So practically 100% of the plans that I read have invasive species control as one of the first and major aspects in the management. If you're looking at reforestation, you may have tree planting in there as something you can do to add in, and it'll give you specs on what species are best recommended for that site, what spacings and things like that. And then timber harvest. Timber harvest is not only an economic income deriving kind of practice. It can also be a management practice, as Lenny talked about wonderfully before me, but you'll often see timber harvest recommended as a management practice. In some places you may see pruning recommended, particularly if it's a tree planting or a site like a walnut plantation to kind of enhance the quality of your timber there. You may see pruning recommended in there. And then for wildlife, you may see snag creation or snag retention on there, especially if wildlife is one of your goals. Coarse woody debris or downed log retention in there is another thing that you may see listed as a recommendation. And then boundary marking is something. If your boundaries are a little unclear, you're not sure where they're at, boundary marking may be one of the first things that's recommended in a plan. And like Indiana, Illinois does have a purple paint law. You can find out more information about that on the Illinois Forestry Association's website. They actually sell the signs you see on the left there. But definitely recommend clear marking of your boundaries, and that's something you'll see in plans show up quite a bit. So kind of finally here, there's a few resources in Illinois that are useful as you're looking at starting your forest management on your land. The Illinois Forestry Best Management Practices. And I think Lenny mentioned these earlier, but this is a document that's available online, or you can get printed versions. It just kind of lays out these best management practices, whether it's trail building, road building, log yards, kind of everything in there. And it's really a good document to have to when you're understanding forest management. If you're looking at controlling invasive species, we do have a management guide in the state that gives you the details of how to control things, what to use and things like that. The Illinois Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry webpage is a great place to go to. It has a lot of information, links to DNR foresters, links to cost share opportunities. So definitely check that out. And then if you're interested here, we have a lot of information on our YouTube channel, the Extension Foresters YouTube channel, where we have a lot of webinars and other resources in there that you can watch just to get more information about forest management. So I definitely recommend checking that out. So there's a lot of resources out there. Definitely Extension Forestry is a resource for questions and also helping you connect to the right people. And so just to kind of wrap things up here at the end, this is a kind of a virtual class as a component of our short course, right? We just really introduced these topics to you, forest management, gave you a general overview of some of the aspects of forest management. And again, I hope you all take advantage of the other component of this short course, which would be our October field days. We have 3 of them scheduled, and you'll be able to tour a managed forest, talk to the managers in person, look at other practices like invasive species control. So those things I think would be very useful as a complement to what we talked about today. And then just an encouragement to continue to utilize extension. DNR and other agencies and other organizations and their resources to learn more and really become active in forest management. And so I'll end here, and I hope we have plenty of time. We got 12 or 13 minutes. Just this last slide has my email address. I'll put my email address in the chat as well. But definitely reach out to Extension. We're here to help out. We're here to answer questions and do what we can, provide opportunities like this.